Dear colleagues, this is Júlio Bizarria, and I am honored to speak on behalf of my colleagues, Edilene Gomes and Juliana Batista. Please allow me to read the most faithful expression of our consensus. We would like to thank the organization of the midterm conference of the Research Committee for the Sociology of Religion of the International Sociological Association, and Dr. Adita Misani, chair of this session on nationalism, populism, and religion, for this opportunity to present our research. We also wish to express our most profound admiration for the initiative of extending this call to scholars who are currently unable to attend the conference in person. This is a bold and humane decision in face of the challenges of an increasingly unequal and still pandemic world, and a model for all future ISA events. Despite its musical undertones, its many subtexts, and the persistent imagery of the depths of the body, this presentation, Get Born Again, is neither a song nor an episode of Grey's Anatomy, but a brief discussion on the results of a recent exercise of ours concerning the memorial, ritual, and theopolitical aspects of the rise of Bolsonaro in Brazil. It is to be published in Portuguese shortly in the form of a contribution to the first of a 3-volume series titled Bolsonaro and the Religions, edited by Dr. Eduardo Meinberg Filho, and provocatively given the subtitle A Terribly Evangelical Nation. We offer it in consideration of the urgency of comparative and transnational dialogues on 21st century far-right populisms and the role of religion in the public sphere. The rise of Bolsonaro is only the most recent form of several and long-lived far-right discourses that have instrumentalized religion and often developed very specific political theologies, projects toward a Brazilian civil or civic religion, etc. This is not the occasion to examine these tendencies, some of which predate the Brazilian Republic itself, but which had mostly coalesced around the Bolsonaro clan by the early 2010s. The core of our argument is that, having emerged into public debate from controversial episodes related to what Mikhail Bakhtin had termed the material bodily lower stratum, the patriarch presented his platform with the most formidable challenge of divesting their leader of the inglorious and grotesque episodes that had initially projected him. Our investigation suggests that the first significant mention of Bolsonaro's name in the Brazilian press dates from the 3rd of September of 1986, when the weekly Veja, which is Portuguese for Behold, gave him a full page to sign an opinion article of his own. In the piece, titled Our Wages Are Low, writing both as an artillery captain of the Brazilian army and as an alumnus of the prestigious Agulhas Negras Military Academy, Bolsonaro defended a group of students and cadets that had been recently expelled from that institution under allegations of the so-called homosexualism, substance abuse, insubordination, and other such acts which, according to the High Command, made the former students unfit for military service. In Bolsonaro's argument, however, the accusations were a mere pretext whereby the High Command refused to acknowledge the dwindling resources of the armed forces and the dire prospects of the military career in the country. In the following year, the captain returned to the pages of Veja, not as the author of a text, but as the prime suspect of a conspiracy to detonate explosives in strategic points of the water and sanitation network of the city of Rio. Explosives would also be planted in toilet booths in several military units throughout the state, including the captain's former academy, in an initiative intended not necessarily to kill, but to humiliate the high command, once more through the grotesque and the Bakhtinian material bodily law stratum. The High Military Court, in a confidential session, acquitted Bolsonaro of all the charges regarding sewage and exploding latrines. Still, he was sentenced to a 15-day term in a military prison for his text defending the former cadets, and to a compulsory retirement from service with no formal expulsion or cassation of his rank. Against the common notion among his detractors that Bolsonaro lacked intellect or political ability, we argue otherwise. Without ever antagonizing with more powerful names in the Brazilian right, he started an uninterrupted legislative career from as early as 1988, initiating 3 of his sons along the same path. Yet, his vocal defense of the military dictatorship of 1964 through 1985 also made him into a sort of stock character, a caricature of the old regime, often the object of ridicule and satire in several media outlets, including radio and television programs, which gave him much visibility. The platform's solution to make Bolsonaro's presidential aspirations viable was to ritually wash away the memory of the grotesque in an attempt to give birth to a new persona whose messianic project began at the captain's very middle name, Messias or Messiah. The ritual had to be meticulously prepared in a way that could agglutinate the support of more ostensibly religious voters, such as right-leaning evangelical Christians. An erotic pilgrimage and baptism on the banks of the Jordan River in the Likud-ruled state of Israel on the 12th of May, 2016, was uniquely fitting. Widely publicized, the ritual was performed on the very same river where Jesus Christ is believed to have been baptized, and on the very same day that the Brazilian Senate passed their first vote in the process that ousted President Dilma Rousseff. It was also officiated by the chairman of Bolsonaro's former Christian Social Party, or PSC, who was also a pastor of the largest Protestant denomination in the country. In addition to finally allowing Bolsonaro to get born again, theologically and politically, the platform sought to convince their captive and potential interlocutors that this act brought about a messianic future upon Brazil correlates to the demise of the rule of the Brazilian Labour Party with its alleged iniquities. But speaking of captivity, and as a convenient complement to his platform's astuteness, Bolsonaro may have counted with a little help from his former friend and then federal magistrate Sérgio Moro, who ordered the incarceration of Bolsonaro's strongest rival and former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, only 5 months ahead of the ballot. By the time the process was recognized as invalid, to say the very least, Bolsonaro was already the president of Brazil and had already rewarded Moro with a short term as a Minister of Justice. While justice may never have been a feature of the former magistrate and minister, scrupulous scholars studying contemporary Brazil should warn their colleagues of a certain temptation, even within our discipline, of reifying or demonizing evangelical Christianity and other denominations. Bolsonaro enjoyed much support among other confessional actors, such as Catholics, Jews, and even adepts of Afro-Brazilian religions whose belief systems are quite far from messianic sensitivities. This, in fact, is an indication of a relative success of Bolsonaro's baptism, and of his strategy of keeping a primarily Catholic yet trans-denominational Christian identity. What we often heard was, "At least he seems to be a godly man." However, the support base of Bolsonaro, while never a majority, is itself immensely diverse. A São Paulo-based research team, led by the anthropologist Isabella Halil, identified 16 supporter profiles, which does not exclude even others, as happens with any analytic construct. Furthermore, there are important responses among these confessional actors against the power project of Bolsonaro, such as the Evangelical Christians for the Rule of Law, the Christians for Democracy, the Jewish Observatory of Human Rights, the Rio-based Sholem Aleichem Society, or even groups of Afro-Christian and Afro-Brazilian faithful with whom our own collective has worked in the past. We analyzed several events in the Brazilian public sphere and campaign materials of the Bolsonaro platform, many of which wholly apocryphal and circulated in the form of massive and instant messages through Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram, Instagram, and other digital platforms. After all, the question of the legitimacy of the electoral process notwithstanding, Bolsonaro still had a convoluted theopolitical path between his messianic anointment in the Levant and his claim to presidency back in Brazil. A major event of this trajectory was the mysterious stabbing of Bolsonaro during a public rally in the city of Juiz de Fora, on a 3-hour drive from downtown Rio in the neighboring state of Minas Gerais. For his voters, this event had fierce theopolitical implications, not least of which that of being an attempt against the personification of the Brazilian national state, and an irresistible invitation for ourselves to revisit the work of Ernst Kantorowicz. The most visceral confirmation of this association was given by his own voters, who went to cast their vote wearing T-shirts with the slogan, "Brazil is my party," but with a stylized wound, either on the flanks or around the country's name. Despite the oratic baptism and the messianic project of Bolsonaro, the material bodily lower stratum still haunted the patriarch, as supporters and detractors often flirted with it. Among Bolsonaro's supporters, misgivings against former President Lula and his sympathizers are often expressed through terms such as sodomy, alcoholism, other substance abuse, and a variety of slurs, in fact. These are just part of the innumerable racist, sexist, and authoritarian remarks for which Bolsonaro became so widely known, and which are still important to agglutinate specific segments of his support base, even if in contradiction with his messianic persona. This persistence of the Bakhtinian grotesque and its use by Bolsonaro, which is also a testament to his sense of political opportunity, allowed us to hypothesize a differential symbolic efficacy of his baptism, despite its centrality. In any case, the ritual exhibition of the wounded body became a staple of the Bolsonaro administration, along with the rich imagery of martyrdom, sacrifice, and resurrection. The coronavirus disease, which Bolsonaro, though initially reluctant, decided to neglect and deny at all costs and against all scientific evidence, bolstered the reaction of his opponents. These, outraged at the more than 600,000 people reported to have died of the disease in the country between the onset of the pandemic and this presentation, revolve around an antipodal imagery of illegitimate power, genocide, and putrefaction. Most decisive for an agenda of comparative perspectives on recent forms of far-right populisms and nationalist rhetoric is the fact that both the Bolsonaro administration and his opposition seem to have become trapped in an inextricable intertwining of theodicy and propaganda. Every minute detail of the political life of Brazil now seems to require some measure of religious imagery and justification, in literal or purely allegorical form, but all suggesting the cosmic dimensions of Bolsonaro's presidency, either as the Messiah or as his adversary, in a narrative regime that seems compelling even among agnostic, non-confessional, and atheist social actors. If our comparative exercises prove fruitful, it would be quite reasonable to anticipate that our discipline may have a most relevant role in the social political development of the 21st century. Thank you very much. I'll display a very brief set of references for a few seconds before I end this recording. I hope to join you live soon. All the best and stay safe.